You think you know the Browns, but the truth behind the cameras is far darker, far messier, and far more shocking than you could ever imagine. From secret divorces and tangled family ties to marriages that defied logic and birthdays that were trampled for love, power, and control, this is the story they never showed you. The explosive truth behind Cody, Mary, and Janelle, the betrayals, the ignored emotions, and the chaos that built a family on quicksand. And now, for the first time, we're uncovering the shocking beginnings that set the stage for decades of conflict and drama. You know, the Browns have always been fascinating to watch, but behind the cameras, the chaos, the tension, and the deep emotional undercurrents were far more explosive than anyone could imagine. For years, viewers saw smiling faces, laughter, vacations, and a family that seemed to thrive in love. But the truth is, the foundation of the Cody Brown family was anything but stable. The early days before Robin, the unspoken history, the messy beginnings are what truly shaped this family. And what most people do not realize is that those messy foundations never went away. They festered quietly under the surface, waiting for the right moment to explode. And now, with Mary finally speaking up and the tell-all installments coming to light, the truth is finally breaking through the carefully constructed veneer of the show. And what emerges is a story of betrayal, manipulation, tangled relationships, and emotions that were ignored, stomped on, and dismissed. For decades, the Browns presented themselves as a model of polygamous harmony, a vision of love multiplied endlessly. But the reality was that they were struggling to manage human emotions that were impossible to contain, emotions that were natural and valid, but inconvenient in the narrative they were trying to sell to the world. Cody Brown and his family were masters at projecting an image of control and spirituality, but behind closed doors, decisions were often unilateral and feelings were disregarded, especially those of the first wife, Mary, whose voice and consent often seemed secondary to the ambitions of her husband and his new wife, Janelle, who herself came into the family under circumstances that were far from ideal and deeply complex. Janelle's own story is one of fascination, controversy, and tangled loyalties. Long before she became Cody's second wife, she had been married to Adam Barber, Mary's brother, and the implications of that connection are staggering when you begin to piece together the emotional minefield that was being set up from the very start. Imagine, for a moment, being Mary, knowing that your sister-in-law was not just divorcing your brother, but forming a connection with your husband that would fundamentally alter the dynamics of your family in ways that could never be undone. This is not some small detail glossed over for the camera. It is the root of decades of tension and conflict that viewers are only now beginning to understand. The Browns may have wanted to sell a story of love and faith, but the reality was that the introduction of Janelle into the family created a perfect storm of jealousy, resentment, confusion, and emotional turmoil for everyone involved. Janelle herself attended Cody and Mary's wedding while still legally married to Adam, and her divorce was finalized later that same year, making her transition into the family far from clean or simple. There were overlapping feelings, unresolved issues, and a complete disregard for Mary's perspective that created a fragile and volatile environment from the very beginning. Cody and Janelle also made the shocking decision to schedule their wedding on Mary's birthday, an act that on the surface might seem trivial, but when you consider the emotional implications and the power dynamics at play, it becomes a clear demonstration of disregard, and a disregard that required intervention from Cody's own mother to prevent a complete breach of respect. The choice of the wedding date was only one of many instances where the emotional well-being of the first wife was overlooked as decisions were made without consultation or consideration of the fallout. This set the stage for a pattern of behavior that would repeat itself for decades, with Cody making unilateral choices, expecting his wives to manage the emotional consequences on their own, and Janelle being left to navigate a plural marriage where the first wife's resentment was palpable and unavoidable. In addition to the tangled web of marriages, there was the bizarre and little-known story of Janelle's mother, who went to investigate the family, only to end up converting to the faith and marrying Cody's father, creating yet another unconventional familial tie that made Cody Janelle's stepbrother and her husband's father her stepfather. In essence, creating a labyrinth of relationships that even the most devoted fans would find difficult to follow. These are the kinds of dynamics that were downplayed on the show, and yet they are central to understanding the pressures and emotional strain that built up over decades. Mary's feelings were not unreasonable or petty. They were rooted in very real instances of disrespect and boundary violations, and this is something the show often minimized or rewrote to fit the narrative of harmony, polygamy, and unending love. It is important to recognize that the drama and conflict that viewers see today did not appear overnight. It is the result of 30 years of unresolved issues compounded by unilateral decision-making, favoritism, strategic alliances, and the constant layering of new relationships on top of old wounds. Janelle's independence, her famed unbothered persona, was forged in response to these pressures, growing up disowned by much of her family for embracing the faith, and then entering a plural household where she was neither fully welcomed nor fully integrated. She developed a self-reliance and pragmatism that allowed her to survive, but also meant that she was never going to cede her agency easily, and that when Cody began enforcing rules or attempting to assert dominance, she resisted, not out of malice, but because it was instinctual and necessary for her survival. In many ways, the roots of the family collapse are traceable to the very beginning, when emotions were ignored, boundaries were violated, and human nature was underestimated. The Brown struggle is a cautionary tale about what happens when relationships are treated as systems to be managed rather than as complex living networks of people with feelings, histories, and needs. And as Mary and Janelle begin to speak openly about these early experiences, the layers of tension, betrayal, and unacknowledged emotions come into focus, revealing a family that was never built for long-term stability, but was always teetering on the edge of implosion. Every decision, from the wedding date to the handling of divorces to the management of new family additions, set the stage for the conflicts we see now. The fights over property, the disputes on finances, and the lingering emotional resentments are all legacies of that chaotic origin. And the shock value of this story lies not in the scandals or public disputes, but in understanding how deeply human emotions were systematically overlooked in favor of appearances, propaganda, and rigid adherence to polygamous ideals. And what emerges from Mary's recent revelations is the undeniable truth that the Brown story has always been about much more than reality television. It has been about a collision of love, loyalty, betrayal, and human fallibility that the cameras only scratch the surface of. And now, as the details come out, we are able to trace every fracture, fault line, and fissure back to decisions made decades ago. Decisions that were often cruel in their indifference, but that were masked by smiles on the screen, laughter, and the pretense of multiplied love that could withstand any strain, but in reality could not. And this is the secret that has kept viewers both fascinated and frustrated for decades. The tension, the slow boil, the simmering resentment, and the explosive moments that finally break open the veneer of harmony are all rooted in a tangled and emotionally fraught past. A past where feelings were dismissed, relationships overlapped inappropriately, and the very foundation of the family was built on ignoring what it meant to be human and to feel. And as the show begins to finally address these origins, it becomes clear that the story is not just about polygamy or scandal. It is about understanding the consequences of ignoring the very emotions that define us as people, and how those early choices ripple across decades, shaping personalities, decisions, and ultimately the unraveling of a family that once seemed invincible, but was always fragile and ready to crumble at any sign of pressure. And now, with Mary telling her side, the full picture is emerging. the betrayals, the disregard, the complex web of family ties, the power plays, the manipulation, and the deeply human emotional reactions. All of it comes together to reveal a story that is as shocking as it is inevitable, and it forces us as viewers to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the Browns. Theirs was never a story of simple love multiplied. It was a story of survival, navigating impossible dynamics, managing the fallout of disrespect, and finding a way to endure in a household that was anything but conventional. And this is why the show has captivated millions, because underneath the surface drama, there is a story of raw human emotion, conflict, and the consequences of choices made without empathy or foresight. And the more we learn about the early days, the more we realize that the conflicts we see today were baked into the family from the start, and were never going to be resolved by television editing or scripted smiles, because they were grounded in decades of human experience, mistakes, betrayals, disregard, and resilience that cannot be ignored or sanitized. And as Mary shares more details about how Janelle came into the family, how Cody navigated those early choices, how boundaries were ignored, and how emotions were suppressed, we begin to understand why the drama and tension that unfolded over decades was not only predictable, but also heartbreaking in its inevitability, because what we are seeing is the ultimate result of a family built on foundations that could not sustain the weight of human feelings, ambitions, desires, and resentments. And that, my friends, is the story of the Browns at their most shocking, most dramatic, and most tragically human. As the layers peel back, we are left with a family that is complex, contradictory, and impossible to categorize with any simple moral or lesson. And this is exactly why viewers cannot look away, because the narrative is not just entertainment, it is a human story with stakes, trust, betrayal, love, and consequences that will resonate for generations to come. As we continue to peel back the layers of the Cody Brown family and the introduction of Janelle into the household, it becomes increasingly clear that what unfolded on camera was only the tip of the iceberg. Behind the smiles, the carefully staged family moments, and the scripted dialogue, there was a relentless undercurrent of tension, emotional strain, and unspoken conflicts that shaped every decision, every interaction, and every relationship within the family. The drama that viewers now see in the form of property disputes, conflicts over finances, and heated arguments is deeply rooted in the very beginning. The messy, tangled web of relationships that formed before Janelle even officially became Cody's wife provides the blueprint for understanding why this plural marriage struggled from the outset. Mary's perspective on the early days is particularly important because it highlights the repeated pattern of emotional dismissal and boundary violations that would define her experience for decades. When Janelle entered the family, she was not a neutral addition. She brought with her a complicated history, a recent divorce from Mary's brother, and a fascination with polygamy that her previous husband did not share. This combination created a scenario that was emotionally charged and highly combustible. Janelle's attendance at Cody and Mary's wedding, while still legally married to Adam Barber, is a detail that cannot be overlooked because to the gradual erosion of trust and respect among family members and set the stage for the conflicts we witness today. The narrative of harmony and love multiplied was always at odds with the reality of human emotion, and the consequences of early decisions and interventions are now coming to light in dramatic ways. The historical context provided by Mary and Janelle's accounts illuminates the structural vulnerabilities within the family. These vulnerabilities were built into the system from the outset, and any attempt to maintain stability without addressing them was doomed to fail. This is the hidden story of the Browns, the intricate web of relationships, the ignored emotions, the unilateral decisions, and the long-term consequences of choices that were made without empathy or foresight. All of these elements coalesce to create a household that was perpetually on the brink of collapse. And as the show continues to reveal details of past and present conflicts, we gain unprecedented insight into the psychological and relational architecture that shaped the family and informs the drama we see today. From early wedding planning disputes to the overlapping marriages, the interventions by extended family members, and the establishment of unconventional family ties, every layer adds to a complex narrative that is both fascinating